Thanks everyone for tuning in to check out our podcast today, Maker Connect. My name is Matt Despins, and I'll be your host for the show. With me today, we have Brian Schreiber. Brian is currently the CRO at Pacific OneSource. We're definitely looking forward to having you on the show, Brian. To get us started, I'd love to hear just a little bit about your career and kind of your interest in sales and negotiations, just to give the listeners some context. So with that, sir, again, I want to reiterate, we are super excited to have you. Brian and I were talking before the show. He's a great guy. So turn it over to you, sir.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
My career in sales and negotiations started, right out of college. And well, actually, we all negotiate before that, right? In our life, sometimes kids are the best negotiators.
That's right.
So it starts young. But career-wise, I remember my first job out of college was sales. And I remember my manager saying about 3 months in, he said, I don't think you're going to make it. And I was like at the bottom of the list. My numbers sucked. And I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. And so it clicked after he said that. It motivated me to get better. And I realized that there's the art of negotiations and sales, and there's also the science of it. And so I started to really dive into the science piece of it. And get some help. And so quickly I went from last in the company to top 3 and then number 1, which I sustained for a while. And so it was that moment when I really started to enjoy sales, because I'm competitive. I was an athlete growing up, and we all like to win. And so, sales to me is an opportunity every time you go to win or lose, and you're going to lose a lot, but the wins feel great, right? So started to get some success in that. And then that success moved me into leadership. And I've been working my way up through different organizations and sales leadership roles. And then, and now in kind of the executive arena, I've been in the executive arena for about 8 years. And so the negotiations, the skill set that I learned at that first job still apply, just on a much larger, different type of scale. But still, it's great to have the wins and to feel that success for the team and the company, wherever you're representing. So
I want to ask you a minute about, so when you had that manager who said that to you, which I think we all have, I swear sometimes I look for people to tell me that I'm going to fail, right? Like I need that fuel in the tank. Like I'd say, please tell me you think I can't do it, And so do you remember how old you were when he had that conversation with you?
I was 22.
Okay.
I was right out of college. And so, and I had kind of a big ego back then. So
I don't believe it. No way. Nobody has a big ego at 22 years old, Brian. You're lying. You're lying.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So it was definitely, I appreciated the authentic feedback. And just hitting me with it, because it definitely did a lot of good for me. So.
Yeah, I mean, few things can be as motivating as that. Talking about a minute, some of that, like that fire that stirred inside of you, emotions, and we just talked about ego, right? So, back then, he really lit a fire for you, and you also were dealing with that with a 22-year-old ego, right? Which we all had. I mean, everybody except me. I'm the only person who didn't. But when you look at the negotiations that you've had, either at that time or through the years, 2-part question. First part is, have you seen negotiations be a big part of that? Like, do you feel like that happens a lot? And second part of that question would be, how, if at all, have your views changed through the years as you progressed from that beginning stages career to some of the amazing accomplishments that you've had now? So first part is, how have you seen negotiations factor through? And secondly is, how has your perception of ego changed as you've gone through your career?
It's a great question. So ego and emotions, right, we have them so that it spurs action. And so that it's a great thing to have. Actually, we all have it. But sometimes, the action it spurs can be not very calculated or logical, because there's too much of it involved. And so the only way to get better and to shed ego through this process is to fail multiple times. And so um, it was actually the first half of my career really was driven a lot by my ego. And I found a lot of success with that in specific negotiations and small and big deals, and then also career progression, right? But at some point, you hit a wall, and you realize that that ego is more, it's ego, not confidence. And true confidence is where you can shed a lot of that ego and you understand the true value that you're bringing, either as an individual or as an organization. And when you can really understand that value, believe in it, and be secure in it, then you get to that next level in negotiations and sales and leadership, I think. And that's what I've found. So you had to hit that wall in order to realize, wow, there was a lot of fake confidence, and that was actually ego that was coming through there. The other thing, as I've moved forward through that process, is just learning to be aware of my body, breathing, the different feelings I'll get in my gut. In different environments and different interactions you're having through negotiation. And so I've really learned to listen to that, listen to my body, learn how to control those emotions, which ultimately has led to really good things. A lot of times it's not feeling right. The conversation isn't going the right way. So it's, hey, let's press pause and let's pick up next week, because there was something telling me not to. So all of that happens through a maturing process, happened for me through the maturing process and shedding a lot of that ego, failing multiple times. And here we are today. I feel like in a better spot, although I still fail sometimes in negotiations.
Find me somebody who says they don't fail in negotiations, and you find somebody who's lying.
Right.
I love that call out there about really prioritizing the outcome over the emotion, right? Because as you talked about, Brian, being aware of your body, your breathing, one of my favorite sayings is, I've suffered a great many tragedies in life, most of which have never actually occurred, right? And so I think we have a tendency to really, really take unknown information and compartmentalize that as negativity and fear, right? So I love that you talked about being able to do that. When you're going through your negotiations, do you try to have that mindset of outcome over how I feel about it? Right? Like, in other words, the goal is the outcome. The goal is the identified target. It doesn't matter that it may feel bad getting there. I still have to get there. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. Yeah, you're spot on with that. And I think one of the things that has helped me is that, is really understanding before you go into that negotiation or that deal, why you want it. And then when you think you know why you want it, you got to get to that next level depth of, why do I really want it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think of actually an example we're going through right now with my company, and we're negotiating with another CEO and another organization that we may do a bit more business with in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And, at surface level, it feels like, okay, we want this because we want to double in size and we want to grow but actually, beneath that, it's more about, hey, we want to take care of our employees that have stock in this company, right? And so as we enter this negotiation, it's less about like doubling in size and growing. It's more about the employees that are here that have been with us and making sure that we keep that in mind through this negotiation process. And if you're rooted in those, that the true why on why you're really passionate about this, then when you start to get off course or you're veering one way or the other, or emotions are pushing you one way or the other, you can refer back to that and you can come back and stay grounded and keep moving toward that outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm always surprised by how somebody's experiences within their career can shape so much of what they do. Um, I think that, to your point though, the ones that really are talented and succeed are the ones that are able to learn from that and may be able to adopt that into their new strategy. Um, when we talk about that art versus science that you mentioned earlier, you strike me, and I'm a bit of the same way, but there's a lot of different avenues to get there. You strike me a bit as somebody who is very much driven by more of the science side, like looking at it a bit of as like a series of steps or equations or building roadmaps, for each variable that could occur. Am I right about that, or am I way off in
You're,
my in
you're
my
right.
assessment of you?
You're right. I am a massive planner to the point
Yeah.
where it can sometimes, I've had to, over the course of my career and my life, really just remember to stay in the present. Don't get too far ahead of myself. Right. So yes, you're spot on with that.
Where do you think that came from? Have you always been that? Like, I can speak for myself and say that for as long as I remember, I've always had that mindset of like always want to know the rules of the game before I play it. I don't actually know where it came from for me. Do you have any recollection of what might have built that inside of you, or is it just kind of there?
Um, I grew up playing sports,
Yeah.
and that has a lot to do with it. I think, all the different practice, all the training, everything that went into, that game day. Right. And so
Hmm.
I realized over the course of time that, it was all that stuff that really helped me succeed on game day. And so that's probably the reason why, it's become part of who I am. Maybe one of the reasons why. Um, I was the oldest sibling in the family too, right? So
Hmm.
naturally, you kind of take that leadership role, and to be a leader, you can't just flounder around. You got to have a plan, and you got to know where you're going and have a vision. So
Yep.
yeah, so I think those things probably make a lot of sense. I played football, and I was always small, and so I ended
Okay.
up playing D3 football in college. And in order to play, when D3 athletes are typically really technical because they didn't necessarily have
Sure.
natural talent to be D1, but they made it into college because
Yep.
they were skilled in the technical end of things. So maybe that's part of why I am. Yeah, now that I think about it,
Just out of curiosity, what position were you?
I was a cornerback.
Okay,
Defensive.
if you were small, I was going to say some type of a cornerback or a safety or something like that. Okay, you were quick. I bet you were quick.
Yeah, I was decent. Decent.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So when we look at an overall strategy of negotiations, Brian, talk to me about this. I kind of like this question. When you look at the way that movies portray negotiations, kind of like pounding fists on the table and really confrontational and like kind of like manipulative. Um, how do you think, what have you seen a real life negotiation be? How does that differ from the movies?
Yeah, I've been in a once in a while negotiation that's like that, but it's not really much of a negotiation. It's really one sided, right? So a
Mhm.
true negotiation is when, in order to get a deal done, there has to be trust built, and you don't build trust
There you
by
go.
doing that, right? And so sales and negotiation is all about relationships and building that trust. And when you actually trust the other person that you're working with, then you get somewhere, right? Then you start to find middle ground. Then you're willing to move a little bit this way, a little bit that way to get things done. So no, I think the majority of times it is compromise. It's understanding somebody's story, going back to the why. Why they want to do this, and really finding middle ground, but building that trust. And trust has happen the most when you're upfront, honest, and authentic. There's certain parts of negotiation you want to show all your cards, right? There's a lot of information you don't want to share right at the beginning, but at some point you're going to have to step out and be a little bit vulnerable and share something and take that step, and that's what builds trust, and then that's what ultimately leads to a deal. So no, it's quite different from some of the movies you see. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you talked about that too, building trust, because I think sometimes people think about negotiation as, like, you said, like that vulnerability. They look at that vulnerability as a weakness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality of it is that in a proper negotiation, there is a lot of trust. There is a lot of transparency. Love the call out on authenticity. Super important, I think, in the last 5 years, especially. But
Yep.
the reality of it is that, to back to your point earlier, Brian, is that if we're looking at simply trying to make the best decisions to get to the desired outcome, you have better outcomes with better trust. Have you seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you have that trust, you can find out what the other side values, right? Because I mean, we know that negotiations are about value. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that for a minute. Like, when you go into a negotiation, what is kind of, whether it's very complex or just pretty like basic, what are your thoughts on how you're trying to determine how the other side may value what you have, right? Because that's why we're negotiating. We want something that they have, they want something we have.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to know that, I have to know how much value they're placing on what I have, right? So when you're going into that negotiation, the planning phase, is there any special way that you kind of try to get a sense of that?
So yeah, the planning and preparation stage is really important, and there's two components to it, right? It's one is planning is collecting information, right? And so you want to make sure you're collecting good information, a lot of information, and most people, I think, spend 80% of their time in preparation on that. The problem is the other part of that is how are you going to use that information? And that's
Sure.
really the most important part. And that's where you get into what you're talking about, Matt, which is how much do they value this quality that in me or my business? And then knowing that, how will I use the information that I've just gathered to now negotiate, right? So and to understand what levers I can pull and when I can push and when I need to back off and when I need to give in. So um, spend a lot of time planning, but really work on how are you going to use all that information you gathered? How is that other person going to use that information? Spend more time thinking about why they want this versus why you want this. And
Love
naturally,
it.
we always think about why we want this, and we start to get excited. And wow, like if these two companies merge, like wow, we could do this, and I could pay off this, and I could set my kids up for this, right? No, think about why they want to do it, and then how that relates to why you want to do it, and then understanding why they want to do it, and what then you can start to dive into. Okay, they're going to value this. This is going to be a top priority, most likely. Now, once you get into it, you can test that, right? You can throw that out there and see what their reaction is. You think that they value this in you, right? So you can push on that a little bit and see how they react. But you have to have spent that time thinking that through.
Yeah, because that planning phase has so many components to it. Not only trying to think about their what they value, but also coming up with alternative plans, right? Because if you're in a very complex deal, a very complex negotiation, it's got a lot of variables. Inevitably, you're not ever going to get all those, right?
No.
And so learning when I don't get this, what am I going to do this? How am I going to factor that in? So do you have any concept, or I should say, have you ever given any thought to uh, how much time you might spend on a typical planning process for a negotiation? I mean, probably deal and variable
Yeah.
dependent. But as you look back at all the ones you've planned for, does that normally happen in a few hours, a couple days?
Depends
What
on
would you
the
say
deal,
in
right?
general?
Depends on the deal.
Yeah.
But I would say probably um, it really does depend on the deal. Sometimes it's weeks and months of preparation, and it's getting a lot of different people
Sure.
involved to gather that information to get to a spot where you're comfortable. Sometimes it could be a couple hours. Most likely, on an average negotiation, it's probably a day or two. Spend a day or two really diving
Mhm.
in and making sure your ducks are in a row. But certainly some of the bigger deals like M&A and those types of things that I've gone through, that's going to take a lot of due diligence and a lot of information that you want to gather and a lot of preparation. So, you said something, Matt, that made a lot of sense. And that is, when we go through a negotiation process, you want to keep you want to keep all those hypotheticals open. You don't want to close doors as you go along. And so one of the things we have a natural tendency to do as humans is like, we want to get here. So I got to go these 10 steps to get here. Well, I already did these 4. So I'm going to close that off and I'm done. Right. So I don't have to worry about this anymore. Now it's really not the best way to go about negotiation. Keep all things up on the table, all things open, because you never know. They're going to come in and out, just like our life. Like people come in and out of our life all the time. And sometimes we don't know why they're coming and going, but there's a reason. And so all those different hypotheticals coming in and out, at the end, it all will wrap together. But you don't want to close those doors and check a box because you need to keep those all on the table in order to be successful there. One of the things you said too was, that in the preparation process and having a plan B, sometimes we think that the plan B has to be within that same negotiation, right? Okay, here's outcome A that I want, and if I can't get that, then we'll do this, right? But sometimes plan B has nothing to do with the person you're negotiating with. I mean, it could be, hey, we really want to merge with this company, or we really want to acquire this company. But if it doesn't work out, there's actually these 4 other companies that we could do this with too. Yeah, it would suck. It would take a little longer to do. We'd have to start all over. But hey, it's still there. So it's kind of going into a negotiation. You need to have, one of the things that I've learned is have the abundance mindset versus the scarcity mindset. And, that not only negotiations and sales, but really life in general, right? Just going in with that confidence that, hey, there's other things out there that could be better for me than this in front of me right now. And even as good as this looks, there very well could be something better. So having that abundance mindset going into it is important as well. And if you do all that stuff and you've planned properly, you're going to go into that negotiation from a place of power because you've eliminated that fear through all those different things you've done. And you walk into it from a place of power and strength. And that, of course, helps you along the way.
You called out a couple of things I loved. First off, I absolutely loved that. It's the first time in this podcast that I've actually heard it. It makes perfect sense. But the fluidity of value, right? So we think about the agenda items, our asks in a negotiation, and we think about, okay, well, this has this amount of importance, right? If I get that, great. If not, I'm going to try to work it in again. But if I got A, B, C, now maybe D becomes much less valuable to me, right, Brian? So you just called out something that I hadn't really thought of before, which is as you're in the negotiation, all of these things can ebb and flow in value, right?
Yes.
Depending. Yeah. And so to your point, keeping them all open is a really, really, really powerful thing. I love that call out. Have you seen that to be a pretty effective strategy?
Yeah, it requires patience, and the majority of us don't have a lot of patience. And if we had more patience and we were able to do that more, we'll probably reach better outcomes. So yeah, I that's something that I've learned along the way. And when I've done that and committed to it, and sometimes, you have to have a partner in crime that you're going through this negotiation with to kind of put you in check, right? But
sure,
you almost lay down the groundwork with that other person or other individuals and say, hey, remember this, keep me in check when I try and solve problems along the way and create outcomes when they're not ready to be created. Please backpedal me, right? So. Yeah.
And that abundance mindset too is a great call out, because it's funny, when we look at so many things in our lives that have gone quote unquote badly at the time, or attach an emotion to it that doesn't feel good, right? So many times in life, you look back at that 1-2 years later and you're like, I'm really thankful that happened. So in the same way you talked about some of our hardest lessons or most painful lessons being the ones that grow the most, I love your call out, Brian, about how, listen, going into negotiation, you have the things you want, but understand that if you don't, you're still going to be okay. We're going to figure out something else later on. Right. I absolutely love that mindset. Is that kind of, do you try to, I think you said in other places too, you try to live your life like that too?
Yeah, I do, and I've learned whether it's relationships or the way you go about your day is just something that a motto that I learned during some hard times was that I repeat constantly is turn fear into faith and act. And if you can do that, then you'll see that there's a lot of other doors that are open and created, and you just kind of keep marching forward. But so that's something that I've tried to live by in all areas of my life. And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I still get caught up in the emotion of it, but more so than I don't. I think I'm getting there. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you ever master the ability to completely eliminate emotion, then please, one of the things that we're going to chat about here is as we close up in just a bit. I mean, Brian's also doing some coaching, and I mean, so if I would already be interested in your coaching. If you learn to completely eliminate emotion, sign me up, right?
That's right. Right. Yeah.
Because it is part of the human condition. So before we kind of wrap up here, and I want to hear a lot more about Pacific One Source and kind of some of these other projects that you're working on. To the listeners, you'll hear in a minute. Brian is an extremely talented guy, so we're going to get to that in a minute. But I want to, because we are talking about human emotion and stuff. I want to dive into, the same topic 99% of people are talking about right now. I want to talk about AI. And wait, should I pause there for everybody to go, oh, AI, right? But with the caveat being that anything that you and I talk about right now in 5 minutes could be different, right? So there's no definitive statement. But when you look at AI from a negotiation or even sales perspective, does any of that excite you / have any value, or are you more of like a little bit of like, yeah, I'm not really sold yet? What are your feelings about that as it relates to sales and negotiations?
It's a great question. I know there's a place. There's obviously a big place for it, and I'm just not quite sure, honestly, Matt, where I land today. It won't ever replace everything, but there's certainly, I think it's going to be a huge tool and resource in sales negotiation. Topics we're talking about today make a big difference in how we go about things, how we use our time, and how we use people. Right. So, so I am still. I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to go out on with bold statements because I'm still not sure myself. But we have started to see it come in, and I'm in technology, the field of technology. So there's a lot of AI products and so forth that are really coming to the market, which is exciting, and it's obviously here to stay. And with anything, I think the faster to embrace and figure out the best ways to utilize is going to be the ones that get off to the head start. So I'm excited to learn more and see where it goes, but not quite sure yet. Never eliminate.
I subscribe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I subscribe to that as that same theory as well, which is like, I know there's a lot of value with just such early days. I think we still need to figure out and fine tune how that's going to be. Right now it's being flooded. And I think the products that aren't doing a good job are giving a bad name to some of the ones that will end up being very useful. So I think you and I are fully aligned there. I'll tell you, I say this sometimes on the podcast. I saw a funny picture on LinkedIn. It was a few weeks ago. Somebody had made a post, and it was, I think it was in Philadelphia. They were working on this big, huge building. And instead of Tyvek, the insulating wrap on the outside of the building, they had made a big, huge banner. Now it's a steel frame building. They had made a big, huge banner that said, "Hey, Chat GPT, come finish this building, right?
That's funny. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, so there's going to be a human element for a very long time. I think the question remains, what does that look like? So,
Yeah,
uh,
anytime,
Brian,
like, I'm sorry, but I
no,
always use
no,
this when it comes to teams, and when there's massive change in a team or a company or leadership. There's four stages that every team goes through during change, and that's forming, storming, norming, and performing. And I also look at when you introduce something like AI into the world, or other massive breakthroughs over the years. You kind of go through that same stage. You're forming, then you're storming, and then you're norming, and then everybody kind of figures out how to actually use it to perform. And so I think we'll go through that same cycle with AI.
I'd never heard that before. What'd you say?
Forming, storming,
Storming.
norming, and performing. And the reason why I know that is
Ah,
because every job I've stepped into, it always, that cycle always happens, because there's turnover and change with the team, and everybody freaks out. And I just say, hold on, we'll get there. We'll get there. So it always does.
we always do, right? As I said in the beginning, it's like we always have this perception of fear and like bad things, and on occasion it does. But like most of the time, it's really not as bad as we think it's going to be. And I, to whatever that personal struggle that you had, Brian, that you had to overcome. I mean, you obviously did a tremendous job there, and I think there's always congratulations on. I think there's always some type of benefit to be had from the things that we go through. Would you agree?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. And
Yeah.
the faster you can kind of surrender to it and embrace that and recognize that, the faster you'll move through it and learn the lesson.
Well, in light of all the things that you just said, wait till our listeners hear about this. So, Brian, your full time employment is as a CRO at Pacific One Source. But as you shared with me in the beginning, in addition to that role, which I'd love to hear more about, and Pacific One Source, and why folks should come chat, you have a couple other irons in the fire too. So, with that, me as the host, I'm going to ask that you shamelessly promote yourself right now. So all of your humility is intact. It's me making the request. So, Brian, please brag. I want to hear everything, why people should be getting in touch with you on LinkedIn or whatever method you choose. I want to hear it all.
Got it. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, and I'm definitely more on the humble side, so this is a little uncomfortable, but sure. So so
I am requesting it. It's my show.
all right, awesome. I must do that. I'll go into Pacific One Source in a minute. In addition to that
Okay.
that role with the organization, I am an executive coach. So I do executive coaching. I'm a public and professional speaker. So I do that as well, and then I also do consulting. So I help companies of all sizes. I've spent time in companies as big as 16 billion down to 100 million, and so I spend time
Okay.
consulting for different size companies on anything from revenue growth to leadership change management. You name it, I can kind of speak to it. So those are some things that I do in addition to my chief revenue officer role with Pacific One Source. And Pacific One Source is a company we sell all kinds of solutions into education primarily. So we sell technology solutions, software, managed service solutions into the K-12 space, private and public schools across the U.S., and then higher ed, and we do some in government and so forth. So it's a great organization. We're growing rapidly. We're primarily based on the West Coast, but we're expanding nationwide. And company full of good people, and we're trying to do the right thing. And really, the industry's changed quite a bit with COVID happening and the need for technology in schools, and not only the need for technology, but the need for teachers and educators to be able to use it effectively to positively impact learning outcomes. And so that's one of the things that we really focus on at our organization is we're the bridge that connects communities of educators so that they can fill the promise of learning through technology. And so that is our mission as an organization. So that's a little bit about myself. Other than that, I have three boys that keep me busy outside of all that stuff. And, again, thanks for this opportunity, Matt. It's great. And as far as the coaching, professional speaking, and consulting, that's really my passion, right? I love that. It's fun for me, and not that my career isn't fun for me either, but that's the add-ons that really make it all worthwhile. So
Yeah, I was never letting you off the hook that easy. I saw you trying to escape after you told us about yourself, but I'm totally going back to that with like one or two questions here. Yeah, so just real quick, so folks who are thinking about management, consultant, change consultancy, executive coaching, that's your world outside of your full-time gig. I love and appreciate that. As I shared with you in the beginning, I'm also a voice actor. In addition to my full-time career, I love them both, but the voice acting really has a passion of mine as well. So I respect that. So, and then I just want to ask about Pacific One Source. So is your team building out like the whole infrastructure of this technology? Is it more just like the actual like laptops? I don't know anything about this. So,
yeah.
yeah, is it building the whole thing?
It's pretty much any type of technology a school would need, we can provide. So it could be
Okay.
Chromebook, it could be as simple as devices and Chromebooks and interactive flat panels. It can also be security. It could be physical security in schools. It could be cyber security. It could be networking, so building out their network, cloud services, Wi-Fi services. We also have a business unit underneath Pacific One Source that places IT personnel within schools. So
Oh,
a lot of schools that maybe are in different small to medium sized schools that can't really invest the capital in their own IT team. Will come in and manage their IT services for them, and that business is called Edutech. So there's a lot of different areas where we can help schools, districts, and education in general. Pretty much
wow.
all aspects of IT and technology, we can be there. And then, well, we have another division that is called Ed Collaborators, and that's the professional development. So not only do we place the technology and help the school districts with their tech plans, but then we also make sure that the teachers that are using the technology have the proper training to be able to use it right in the classrooms. So yeah, it's
What an incredible resource for an industry that needs help so much right now. And I shared with Brian before we close up here. In my past life, I was a mental health therapist and a law enforcement, and so a police officer. So I really resonate with those areas of work, people who are out there trying to do that. So, Brian, between your side stuff, coaching and doing the executive management stuff and whatnot, like combined with that, it must be, and your three boys, that's a pretty rewarding life of abundance, I would say.
absolutely. I am a lucky guy, and I appreciate it all. It's been great. So
Cool. Well, I will. Do you have any final thoughts here before we wrap up?
no, this has been a great time on the show, Matt. I appreciate it. You've been an awesome host before and afterwards, so I really appreciate the time.
Cool. Well, we truly and genuinely enjoyed having you, sir. You were great. So thank you so much. And again, everybody, this is Brian Schreiber, and he is with Pacific One Source. In addition to, as you heard, doing some executive coaching and other management coaching. So you can find him on LinkedIn as well. Reach out and connect. And thank you guys all for listening. We'll see you again next time.